Thank you everyone for joining us today. So the hot topic of the day is engaging with communities and stakeholders today. That is to say how to integrate stakeholders in our offshore wind projects. And when we are speaking of stakeholders, we talk about fishermen, from fishermen to industrial players, from elected official to environmental association, from citizen to tourism sector, and so on. And what you have to bear in mind is that we are talking with stakeholders to enrich our project, to answer their question, to address their concern, but you need to find a balance as well, not to indulge in wishful thinking regarding our project. So to establish a relationship with someone, it's better to know who you're dealing with. So first, we are going to remind you of a few facts and figures regarding RWE. So we have currently 19 offshore wind farms in operation. It's 20 years of expertise in offshore wind energy, and it's also 20 years speaking to communities on the field. It's a continuous dialogue since 20 years. We also have 18 offshore wind in operation, in development, and in construction in Europe, USA, and also in Asia. So it's the second map you have here. And last but not least, we are 40 in France, 40 women and men working on offshore wind. And it can seem not that much, but actually it's quite unusual for a developer to be 40 people in the field in France when we don't have any offshore wind farm in operation yet. So it's an important job in the field. For example, Florent here, he already met with around 500 industrial players. So it's worthy an electoral campaign. One thing to bear in mind is that when we work on offshore projects, we are with the communities in the area of development of this project during many years and sometimes many decades. For example, for the South Brittany floating project in France, you had to be in the field engaging with communities and stakeholders at least in 2020 when the public consultation began. And today we're in 2023 and we didn't submit our offer yet. So the result of that is you have many pre-charter agreements with the stakeholders, many partnership, pre-bid, and it's a great thing because if you are awarded with a project, it really is the development of the project. But it's a lot of work, of course, for the team to be in the field and in direct contact with all the stakeholders. Sorry. So first, because before giving you some feedback about our offshore wind farm in operation, we want you to have an idea. Well, we want us to see if you have an idea of the initiatives we are working on with the stakeholders. So if you can raise your hand, we are going to ask a few questions. So first, we have an offshore wind farm in Rampion. It's in the south coast of England. It's really near the waters of France. And for Rampion, we work with the fishermen in a very early stage to validate some rules with them for the construction of the project. So guess, what do you think? Did we work with 20 fishermen, 70, or 120? We think it's 20. We think it's 70. We think it's 120. Well, actually, it's the second one. It's 70. It's a lot because usually, for example, in France, when you work with fishery committees, you're not in direct contact with so many fishermen. But for Rampion, we start to work in a very early stage with many fishermen from the Sussex coast. And in the end, it was a great work because they also help us with the layout of our offshore wind farm to shorten it. And we are still working with them on other projects, and we are actually extending the offshore wind farm with Rampion 2, and there's another fishermen work group ongoing. So second question, Do you think that we have invented a drone to scare birds with environmental association? So the one who think that's true, you can raise your hand. Excellent. Well, no, it's not true, but I won't get it. But we commissioned a kitty wakery recently. So maybe I will leave Claire give you a word about it because Claire is our environmental manager.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so we commissioned a kitty wakery, and a kitty wakery is a hotel for birds. And so this is the design. So this is not the Mercure, this is not the Novotel, but it's good enough for those kitty wakes. And the idea was to support the population and nesting colonies that live in the northeast of England, move from an urban area where they're treated as pests back into more of a natural environment for the species, so that we can, I guess, support the population and its survival. Because at the moment, obviously, it's threatened by several concerns, overfishing, of course, so loss of prey, and climate change. So the idea was to try to give them a new habitat so these colonies can move into this hotel, nest successfully, and then have a better life. So we constructed this tower in collaboration with a very specialist consulting firm. It can host about 250 nests. The idea is that it's got a central staircase with an observation platform in the middle that allows us to monitor the birds, but also obviously improve the nest if needs be, or provide additional help to the birds. So the good news is the first kittiwake actually landed on the tower a few weeks ago. So only after a few months after being commissioned, there was already interest from the birds into the tower. So we got really good hope of getting a colony established soon.
Thank you, Claire. So we will give you a feedback now from our offshore wind farm in operation. We will start with Rampion, I was mentioning earlier. So Rampion, as I was saying, is really close from the French water. It's here. And we are going to give you the lessons learned and the most important partnership we've built with the stakeholders.
Okay, we're going to talk about Rampion and its extension. So this Rampion and Rampion 2. We've put in place several management and mitigation measures for Rampion. The park is actually in a sensitive environment for several commercial fish species. So from the surveys that we conducted, we realized that some of the area that we were going to develop the park in was actually sensitive areas for the black bream and the herring. So the mitigation, I guess, or the management we put in place was to avoid the sensitive periods for those species, in particular spawning, and therefore we delayed any installation activities that would occur during those periods to avoid impact to those species. We've also looked into the cable corridor and routing to shore for Rampion. We're in charge of the connection in the UK, and looking at, I guess, the sensitive features of the environment, realised that we had several marine designated areas closer to shore. We ended up redesigning the actual cable route to avoid those areas. And finally, Rampion 2. We, through the consultation period, discussed with shipping stakeholders, but also obviously local communities, and the feedback that came back was obviously visual impact to shipping. So we ended up reducing the overall footprint by about 50%, as well as reducing the number of turbines that were going to actually be implemented from 116 to 90. So they're quite big changes that we're ready to make in consultation with our stakeholders to ensure that we can develop projects that are obviously sustainable and accepted.
We also worked a lot with stakeholders related to training and education. So we've launched a visitor center in Rampion, and it has a lot of success. It's funny because 2 months ago, The Economist was written an article about the fact that offshore wind industry can also lead to tourism, and it was related to our offshore wind park in Rampion. It was a bit hard at the beginning because we opened it right before COVID. So it was obviously closed for a long period of time, but it has a lot of success with both tourist visitors and also the inhabitants of the coast and the surrounding of the offshore wind park. And it's a major point to have in mind is that we are always working on our offshore wind farm to benefit to the inhabitants, to the citizens close to the offshore wind farm, and also to the visitors, obviously, for tourism. But we really need for us to be an added value to the citizens surrounding the area of the offshore wind farm. And also one thing which I find interesting is the dynamic between the local initiatives and the worldwide program in RWE. For example, we launched the apprenticeship program within the framework of Rampion when we built the offshore wind farm. And it became our worldwide apprenticeship program for RWE, and it's working pretty well. It has a lot of success. And as Claire was mentioning, we were working with environmental association as well as with divers and fishermen. We had a common global working group, and it's a key point because it's not always easy to have fishermen talking with environmental association as well as divers. And we find many rules for them to practice the existing activities in Rampion while the offshore wind farm was built. So now we are going to ask you another question again. We're going to switch a little on local content because I guess you know it, but local content is really key, and it's also a lot of interaction with the stakeholders. As I was mentioning, Florent here met with more than 500 stakeholders, industrial stakeholders in France. So the question is, what recent innovation have we been the first to implement? Do you think it's black blades, or is it recycled blades? So the one who think that is black blades, you can raise your hand. You're too good. So recycled blades? Yes, obviously it was a first, a world first, on Kaskasi, which is a German offshore wind farm. The offshore wind farm was launched at the beginning of 2023. But just so you know, this is a picture of a black blade, and indeed we implemented it, but not on offshore wind farm, on onshore wind farm, on one of our wind farms in Germany. I will leave the floor to Florent now.
Okay, thank you. Hi. So one of the very interesting aspects with the recycling of wind blades is it's not only the technology that allows on Kaskasi blades that coming from Siemens technology that allows to separate the fiber from the resin, from the matrix. It's also the whole supply chain that is allowing to do that and to maximize the amount of recyclability and reuse of the material as well afterward. So, and that's what is very key with developing this kind of project is we have to engage with the supply chain at very early stage, but up to very long-term planning. Because we are not going to decommission this Kaskasi wind farm before 2050, 2060 maybe. And we have to be developing a supply chain now that would be ready to decommission it in 2050. And one part of it is developing the technology together with a technology provider like Siemens in this case, but also with the supply chain, and also to find projects in between now and 2050 to be able to get a supply chain ready and a supply chain able to deliver the volume we will be needing when we will have to decommission this wind farm. And one of the way to do that is that we've already been deploying offshore wind farm for the last 20 years. So we will have a continuous and increasing amount of wind farm to decommission before 2050, with like the usual typical blades that were not designed to be recyclable, and then will be coming the recyclable blade into the supply chain as well. So that's a shift, and that's very engagement with the supply chain. And one other aspect, so we say that to be able to engage early with the supply chain, there is innovation. We saw it before. But also another topic is focusing on smaller, let's say, smaller projects than total commercial wind farm. And that's what we did with our partner SciTech for demonstrator, floating wind demonstrator in north of Spain. So this floater is a 2 megawatt turbine demonstrator that is going to be installed this summer on BMEP test site, and it is right now in the port of Bilbao. And what is very interesting is this project is that 75% on the investment on the pilot was done on a circle of 25 kilometers around Bilbao. So obviously Bilbao is a specific area because you've got the chain manufacturers, you've got towers manufacturers with Haizea, chain with Vicine. You got a very strong supply chain in Bilbao, which makes it possible to get 75% within 25 kilometers. But it's also because the project been engaging at very early stages, from design stage, from concept stage, with the different suppliers. And for some of the suppliers, like for example, there is a swivel joint on this. So they had some expertise in oil and gas industry, but no previous expertise in the offshore wind industry. And now that's the first experience for them in offshore wind, and they are planning to work on more and more floating wind projects. And there are lots of different suppliers. For example, the maintenance company, which is now going to do maintenance offshore and used to be an onshore maintenance company. And it will be their first expertise offshore, and they also want to apply more to bigger projects. So smaller project like this is also a good stepping stone for bigger commercial stage project. And it's very important for developers like us to engage at each level, early stage, innovation, and pilots project, to be able to get a supply chain ready for larger, longer term projects. And if we can come to the next one. And how we do that is by developing a process to be able to engage with the supply chain, identifying at very early stages what are going to be required, what are the gaps within the supply chain on a specific areas, what are the capabilities as well on, like for example, one good example is this company, they led the card here. So that's a small company close to Nantes, and they are doing rope access. But they've been able to work with GE, for example, on the logistic hub. That's not a W example, I mean, just the card is there. But that's a good example of a company which is difficult to find if you look at the big picture. So you would never think about rope access if you look at a foundation, a turbine, and an installation only. But you've got so many companies that can be part of the supply chain. So that's coming from the ground, coming from the field, speaking with the company, speaking with the business clusters, understanding what are the strengths and what are the gaps, then looking at the project, looking at the big pictures as well, and getting both matching together. So having an industrial plan that fits to the local supply chain, fit to the European supply chain and worldwide supply chain to be able to deliver projects. And we do that through STEP, which is we identify, we engage with companies, we integrate them into our supply chain identification system, and then we work on capacity building. We make them meeting the different engineering, technical stakeholders within the company, because we are now 3,000 people working on offshore wind within RWE, so we've got a broad spectrum of experts within the company that we are linking with the individual companies to be able to build their capacity so they will be able to deliver and to partner with us in 2030 when we will have to deliver projects in France. And we are now very happy to take questions, if you have some, about how we engage with the community.
Do you have any question? As I said at the beginning of the session, we have 19 offshore wind farms in operation, so there are many other examples that we can give you. We are very proud as well of our community funds in the UK, because we have part of our income which is dedicated to the communities in UK, and it can be dedicated to many activities, not only energy related. It's 19 million pounds, for example, for Gwyntin Moor, our offshore wind farm in Wales. We have many other initiatives, so don't hesitate if you have any question related to environment, local content, even tourism, culture, education. We will be happy to answer you. Yes, we give you.
Good morning, I'm Nicolas Boutin from Blue Float. I have a question. Did you identify common practice that you could use on different geographies? Because you are in north of Europe in different geographies. Is it easy to share good practices between geographies? Or it's, as is local content, we want to do as close as possible to the countries, to the culture?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Is it working? Yes. Obviously, we're working a lot on best practices because we have a big expertise. As we were telling, it's 20 years of expertise. I think that in your question, there are 2 points that are really important. First, you cannot develop a project only on best practices because obviously you develop a project on a territory, an area which has many dedicated concern, specific question, requests regarding our project. So you need to take into account this particularity of the territory. But, and it's really important for the stakeholders to understand that you work on an area taken into account all the information related to the area. And this is why we are in the field in a very early stage to engage with the stakeholder. But as I wanted to say, since we have all these best practices, we also have some internal groups of stakeholders working together. It can be true for environmental association, for example. We're also trying to set up some group between the fishermen. So we did it between the USA and the UK. We are also trying to implement some, to open our market for local content. So we did it in Brest with the Celtic Sea teams from RWE who come to Brest in Brittany in France to share our expertise. And this is how we can find some synergy for our project. But we always have in mind that we are allowed to develop a project in the field, and we try to cope as much as we can to the request to the stakeholders. And it's not a good approach, as you know, to arrive and say, okay, we have 20 offshore wind farms in operation, so we know it all, and listen to our best practices. It's definitely not the way to do it. This is why we have French people in France, even people from Brittany for Brittany project, of people from from the south for the Med project, and so on. Thank you very much.
Yeah.